All righty, we are going to get started. We've got some new slides and new information today. We're going to really focus in on school reopenings. So I want to thank everybody for joining us, the changing COVID-19 and the impact on your life. If you haven't been on this presentation before, I'm Dr. V, Dr. Valda Crowder. Been an emergency medicine physician now for 30 years, and this is my fourth pandemic. We have the information that's on these slides on the website, AskDrV.us. So all the original source information can be found there. So if you see something on a slide and you're like, I'd really like to have that document, feel free to go to our website, print it out. It's all on there. And then we're also on Twitter, AskDrV. All right, the structure of the webinar is going to be 10 to 15 minutes of slides. We have more like 15 or 20 minutes today because of everything around school reopening, then followed by a question and answer. And we normally complete right at about 8:55 or 9 o'clock. So all in total will be anywhere from 45 minutes to 60 minutes. Everyone will be in listen mode. You can ask a question either at the chat icon, at the chat box, which is shown here in red, or you can actually type a question in the Q&A. You can type in your questions in the chat box or in the Q&A as we're speaking, so you don't have to worry about if there's something, having to remember something till the end of the presentation. We will take the written questions in the Q&A in the chat box first, and then if we're able to open up and go to live questions, then we will. The intention is to keep all webinar participants informed about COVID-19 science to help you and your family stay healthy during this pandemic. We've always said that the main thing in dealing with a pandemic is actually making sure that you stay healthy till there is an actual vaccine or treatment. The outcome of this webinar is that you'll leave the webinar motivated to create an action plan for yourself and your family. You may also be motivated to create an action plan for your broader community. All right, so one of the most important things that's going on here in the United States is that the pandemic, because most of us have health insurance that are related to our job, we have 5.4 million Americans who've lost health insurance as a result of the pandemic. I think this is really important because whenever you have your health insurance tied to your job as opposed to tied to your body, you're at risk for actually losing it possibly at the time that you actually need it the most. There are a lot of things that you see going on with the different hotspots that are developing in Los Angeles and Arizona and Texas and certain counties and states re-looking at shutting down. I thought it was very interesting. On the 13th, Robert Redfield, who's the director of the CDC, said that if everyone wore a mask for 6 weeks, we could actually drive COVID-19 in the ground. And I think it's really, really important that the best way to actually get the economy back up is to actually get a handle on this infection through mask wearing and social distancing. There was another article that said U.S. could get coronavirus under control in 1 to 2 months if everyone actually wore a mask. Now, this gentleman here is a very interesting person. He actually came out of retirement to help with the coronavirus. His name is, let me see if I get his name up, Peter Tsai, out of Taiwan. And he is the inventor and creator of the N95 mask. And so he is the one that actually holds the patent for this mask. So he actually gave what I think is the definitive information on what your mask plan should be. And these are basically his recommendations. He recommended purchasing 7 N95 mask or KN95 mask, right? I looked these up today. This is the left one. You can get 20 on eBay for $12.99, and you can get 10 on Amazon for $2.99. So I looked these up today to see what the price was today, and there's availability today. So roughly you're talking about anywhere from a $15 to $30, $35 investment, okay? What he recommended was using one for each day of the week. Then when the day is done, to actually hang it up on a hanger or in a bathroom. And he basically was stating that if you use that mask on Monday, and then you're going to use that mask again the following Monday, that it sits there for a week, which is enough time to really allow any viruses to be deactivated. So then you don't actually have to get into it. And then obviously as they wear out or wear down, you may need to get replacements. But he recommended cycling the N95 mask so that you're using one every 7 days. All right, so a lot of us know the basics, but just in case, I'd always go over the fact that it's a droplet disease and it stays on surfaces, cardboard surfaces for 24 hours, plastic surfaces for 96 hours. There is some information now that we're also looking at the fact that there may be an airborne component to it, and I will actually speak to that as well. It's highly contagious. You only have to have exposure for 45 seconds to infect another person. One infected person in 30 days will infect 402 people without wearing a mask and carrying on as if it's normal, going to restaurants, bars, and sort of normal activity. There's also percent penetration. How many people out of 100 get the disease if they come in contact with it? For COVID-19, it's high. It's in the 70 to 80% range. Whereas, for instance, with influenza, it's right around 30–40%. Droplet versus airborne is something that you're hearing about a lot. Originally, when COVID-19 was discovered, it was found to be a larger virus that was in droplets. And droplets don't really fall that far from you. They fall about 3 feet from you. So if you remember, some of the initial recommendation was you only had to be 3 feet away. Now they're saying 6 feet or more. And that's because there does seem to be an airborne component to it. So I just kind of want to show a couple of different examples. When we talk about a droplet disease, the ones that we really think about are Ebola, pertussis, and mumps. When you talk about an airborne disease, you're really talking about tuberculosis or measles. So in a diagram, if somebody coughed, if it was a droplet disease, as you can see, it would drop less than 3 feet. Where something that is airborne may hang in the air way beyond 6 feet, and also may hang in the air for 3 to 5 minutes after that person has left that area. So we don't know yet if it's a droplet disease that's spread by micro droplets that then act like they're airborne, or is it somehow or another that COVID-19 is becoming aerosolized, either with heavy breathing or certain actions like playing instruments. We know that it can become airborne with the use of a nebulizer machine. And we had spoken before on this presentation about how it's important to avoid a nebulizer at all, if at all possible, and instead to use an inhaler with a spacer, which is shown here in the diagram to the right. If you must use a nebulizer, you want it to be outside on a porch or a deck, or maybe in a garage with the garage door open, something like that, but you definitely don't want to use it inside the home. We are not using them at all in the hospital. We're not using them in the emergency department. We're not using them in the ICU. We're not using any nebulization because of the possibility that people could be COVID-19 positive and then aerosolize it. This is a study that's coming out in August. This was one of the studies that actually led to people thinking that this was airborne. It was documented airborne transmission related to a fitness dance class where 112 people were actually infected during a 24-day period of time. And this was aerosolation due to heavy breathing associated with the exercise dance class. So aerosolation, the fact that it's airborne or has some components of being airborne, is huge implications for indoor spaces, and specifically indoor spaces that you stay in for a while. So that's movies, churches, gyms, office spaces, schools. There was another study done which showed that they looked at air compressors and they swabbed the compressors. And about a third of the air compressors actually had COVID-19 RNA in the air compressors where the air is being recirculated. So indoor spaces are very, very, that's really, really where we want to really focus on, you know, do we really have to go into these spaces and how can we avoid them at all costs? So obviously a movie theater, very easy to avoid. I know a lot of people have upgraded their Netflix, etc. And so you can kind of watch a movie at home. And the movie theaters, for the most part, on a lot of jurisdictions are shut down. But there's some states where they are still open. You want to avoid a movie theater at all costs. Churches, similarly. The singing, the call and response, and also the any sort of instruments that are being used that someone is blowing into. So some of the data on singing shows that the virus stays in the air for a very long time and travels very far with singing because of the forceful blowing associated with it. So you really want to just, you know, a lot of churches have gone to Zoom. Some of them are doing drive-by church. You want to look at alternatives like that. Now, gyms have also been found to be a pretty big source of infections. And a lot of this is related to not only the heavy breathing, but also, you know, people are sharing equipment, sharing space. This actually shows a couple of gyms, and what they've decided to do, they've kind of put a plastic barrier up between the treadmills. They've also created these plastic, almost boxes that you can then work out in. I think that, you know, at this point there, with the summertime, there's a lot that we can do outdoors. We can take those same weights outdoors. You can walk on nature trails outdoors. So you really want to actually take your exercise outdoors if at all possible. Office spaces. Yeah, so the office spaces are also things that you want to avoid. We did we showed earlier a simulation of someone coughing in the office, and essentially it hangs in the air for roughly about 6 minutes or so. I think it's really important. Office spaces will need to, you know, dramatically change their ventilation, specifically opening up windows, opening up doors, HEPA filters, positive pressure ventilation, and we'll need to do a lot of things like that before they can actually be safe spaces for people to work. All right, now the main focus is schools. So I wanted to just kind of, you know, school reopenings are really going to vary by location and what your actual infection rate is in your particular location. So if you look at states where there's a hot spot, where, you know, Arizona, California, Florida, there has been no country in the world that has opened up schools with that type of community transmission. Okay, so and as an example, there was just an article recently, and I'm going to try to show the data at the very end. But school children, or children less than 18 years old, that were getting COVID tested in Florida, 31% of them were positive. So you can see how if you send kids to school and 31% of them are already positive, that's really a setup for a complete disaster. And so that is really not going to be possible. The other thing that you see is that in this picture here, the students are at a desk with a 3-sided plastic barrier. I've seen where some schools are developing like a 2-sided barrier. That is not as effective. So I'm going to go over first the CDC guidelines. And when and I'll tell you some things in here that I think that are a little bit too weak and they need to be strengthened. So encourage students to stay at home when sick. Should be, do not allow students to come to school when sick. They need to do temperature testing and actually not allow the student to come if they're sick. Clean and disinfect frequently. Significantly monitor absenteeism so you actually know when someone's actually out and possibly might be COVID related. And then to actually have some type of digital or distance learning. So this is very bare bones from the CDC. What actually, I think, did a more thorough evaluation was the American Academy of Pediatrics. Did a very, very thorough evaluation on this. And again, this is on the website, and this is on our website, and then also the original source is sourced down here at the bottom. But specifically, they looked at education, nutrition, student with disabilities, special populations, annual school health requirements, athletics, mental health, isolation measures, and group size. So let's go over some of the things that they said. So pre-K, what the American Academy of Pediatrics did is they have high priority strategies and low priority strategies. I'm going to just go over the high priority strategies because those I think are the most important. So for pre-K, they look to create sort of cohorts where you stay with that cohort throughout the day, right? So for instance, I may I go to school with that cohort, I go to lunch with that cohort, and I also go out to play with that same cohort. And that cohort could be a group that is 10 to 15 kids, right? And I don't mix with another cohort, right? The other thing they looked at in pre-K was utilizing outdoor spaces and limiting unnecessary visitors in the building. When you look at elementary school, they started looking at the children should wear face coverings when they, as long as they don't have a medical reason not to, and that the desks should be 3 to 6 feet apart when feasible, and also have the same concept of a cohort that is 10 to 15 kids that then follow each other throughout the day doing all activities together, and not crossing contact between cohorts, and then also utilizing outdoor spaces whenever possible. Secondary school, they also have same thing, universal facial coverings, and they also have everything around the desk being 3 to 6 feet apart. They also want to have the students in cohorts. They particularly want to avoid singing and exercise. So things that produce increased exhalation. So choir practice would be a no. Any sort of team sports would be a no. Special education, basically this was a lot of writing, but what they basically said was special education needs to be determined on a case-by-case basis, because some students that are in special education or have a disability may have other comorbidities or may have reasons where either the lack of socialization or the use of a mask may be prohibitive. So they really felt like for special education, it should be done on a case-by-case basis. Whoop. Alrighty, so now, as far as riding on a bus, they really encourage that the bus system be minimized to only those students who have to use it, and that really there should be alternative modes of transportation for the students. So whether or not their parents are bringing them, or maybe 2 or 3 students are carpooling, that's basically, they really recommend it minimizing bus or transportation use. Then they also, again, stuck with this whole idea of cohorts, right? And assign the seats by cohorts. So if people are going to be on the bus, they should be sitting with those same 10 people that they're going to be going through the rest of the day with, and have tape that marks off where students should sit and where they cannot sit, in order to maintain 6 feet distance from each other. They said to minimize the number of people on a bus. Any adults who do not need to be on the bus should not be on the bus, and to keep the windows of the bus open as long as weather allows. Hallways. Hallways in the school that they recommended, I've seen this in stores, where you'll have one hallway and it's a one-directional hallway. So this hallway is going in one direction and another hallway is going in another direction. Again, using tape on the floors to keep the direction, and that limits people from bumping into each other if the direction is all in one direction. They also looked at staggering the class periods, which we had talked about here, where, you know, possibly maybe students come in a particular cohort and they're in school from 7 a.m. to noon, and then maybe another group is in school from 1 to 5 p.m. Assigning lockers by cohorts. So again, if I go to my locker, I'm still only around the people that are in my cohort, right? So they talk here about playgrounds. They said the emphasis should be on playgrounds. Again, I'm going out to play with my particular cohort. Outdoor transmission for the virus is much, much lower than indoor transmission. So they felt that limiting the size of the groups playing and limiting them to the cohort would really be sufficient and adequate. Meals and cafeteria. So they, serving meals is an area where there's a lot of kids who get their meals from school and are part of a school lunch program, and they get breakfast and lunch. So this is really an important area. Again, they talk about having the kids getting their meals in the cohorts. So again, I'm not, if you're not in my cohort, then I'm really not seeing you at all during lunch period. Minimizing the amount of time that I'm actually in the lunch period, in the lunch area or the cafeteria area. Utilizing outdoor spaces for kids to eat lunch at. Making sure that there's washing stations and hand sanitizing that occurs before and after eating. All right, so overall, the considerations for really going back to school should also really look at what is the infection rate in your community. New York, the state of New York, and Maine and Rhode Island and Connecticut, the New England states have really done a good job around getting their infection rates down very low. So those schools may be able to have more in-person school. But again, the community rate of infection is very, very important. If that community rate is high, and high is basically if you're doing COVID testing and you're getting, you know, over 5%, that's high. And as you'll see, Florida is in the 20, 30s, 30% range. The age of the children is also important. The data on whether or not, the data on kids giving it to each other versus giving it to adults. Most of what we've seen in schools, for the schools that have reopened in other countries, are adults, other teachers giving it to other teachers, or kids giving it to teachers. Then you also have to consider, are the children a vector, right? So do they live in a multi-generational household? Will they bring it back to an elderly aunt or uncle or grandparent? So those are all things to kind of consider as you actually look at what to do for yourself and your family. So other countries have done most of the things that we actually talked about. The countries have also given PPE to teachers and administrators and staff, and that's the personal protective equipment, the N95 mask, the gloves, the cleansers, the hand sanitizers. You know, again, these are all things that a school district now is going to have to take into consideration in their budget that they were not having to take into consideration previously. And also more frequent cleaning of rooms and offices and buses and the things where people go. They also need to have some universal temperature testing so they can make sure the students that are sick are not allowed in. All right, this is, I get a lot of questions about activities and which activities are high risk versus low risk. This is a COVID risk chart that was put together by the Texas Medical Association. This is also on the website. So if you want to actually get this from the website, you can get this and print it out. But basically, high risk activities would be large music concerts, religious events, going to a bar, going to a sports stadium. Also eating at a buffet, working out at a gym, going to an amusement park, which is interesting because as you all know, Disney World opened up, or going to a movie theater. So those things are all 8s and 9s. Then lower than that is sending your kids to school or day camp, working in a week in an office building, swimming in a public pool, visiting an elderly relative or friend in their home, having dinner at someone else's house, attending a backyard barbecue, going to a beach, or shopping at a mall. Now, as you get down to the 4s, you're talking about things like sitting in a doctor's office, eating at a restaurant outside, walking in a busy downtown area, spending an hour at a playground, staying 2 nights at a hotel. A little bit lower is grocery shopping. So grocery shopping is a 3. Going for a walk or a run or a bike with others, playing golf. 2 is going to a restaurant and getting takeout, pumping gas, playing tennis, or going camping. And I think they put this in here just so that people would really understand what a 1 is. So if you open up your mail in your house, that's a 1. All right, so a little bit of COVID good news. This is very, very important. This is basically a home saliva coronavirus test. These are now being tested and studied. Think of this almost like a home pregnancy test, or maybe even checking your blood sugar at home, like similar to how a diabetic would do. And so the strip goes in there, and you put some saliva. Some of them have, some of them you're spitting into something, but you put your saliva there, and it basically tells you if you're COVID negative or positive. And they're looking at using these strips so that people actually get the printout, and then they get the printout, and that then allows them maybe to go see a play that day, or to go to the movies that day, etc. So, and these rapid tests are cheap. They're in the, I think they're in the, these kits are in the like $5 to $10 range. And then you refill the strips. So it's very interesting to see what sort of innovation is coming out, that possibly people may be able to do their own home COVID test whenever they want to, and however, at whatever frequency they would like to. And that really would be a game changer for this pandemic. All right, so I'm going to switch over now to Q&A. Actually, I wanted to show one thing real quickly before I did that, because I had pulled up, this is the state information for Florida. And I thought that this was actually really important, because if you see here, these are all the counties, and these are the tables showing the testing of Florida residents less than 18 years old. And this shows in the far right hand, on these 2 tables, the percent positive. So Alachua County is 14.4, Baker is 12.9, Bay County is 35.5. And as you see, Lee County on the other side, 46.3. That means half the people tested less than 18 were actually coming back positive. So these numbers are very, very high. And the regular adult population in Florida has a positive rate of 11%, and less than 18 is having a positive rate of 31%. So that is what is happening there in Florida.